In the early hours of June 17, 2017, a routine transit across the waters off Japan's Honshu Island turned into a tragedy. The USS Fitzgerald, a highly advanced destroyer of the United States Navy, collided with the Philippine-flagged container ship ACX Crystal in Sagami-Nata Bay. 7 sailors lost their lives, and the Fitzgerald sustained over $300 million in damage. This collision between two vessels in one of the world's busiest maritime corridors shook the naval community and led to a comprehensive international investigation involving the NTSB, the JTSB, and the Department of the Navy. In this video, we'll dive into the details of the incident, analyze the factors that contributed to the collision, and explore the findings of these investigations and the lasting impact they have had on maritime safety. Disclaimer: the information presented in this video is based on publicly available documents related to the USS Fitzgerald incident, including reports from the National Transportation Safety Board, the Department of the Navy, and the Japan Transport Safety Board. However, these organizations do not endorse, sponsor, or support this video, my work, or any views expressed herein. The content is solely my interpretation of the available material. The USS Fitzgerald is a Flight 1 configuration guided missile destroyer of the Arleigh Burke class, a symbol of American naval power. Commissioned in 1995, the Fitzgerald spans 505 feet in length, with a displacement of 8,300 tons when fully loaded. Powered by 4 General Electric LM-2500 gas turbine engines generating 100,000 shaft horsepower, the destroyer can reach speeds in excess of 30 knots. The ship is equipped with a sophisticated array of weapons, including the Aegis combat system, which integrates its radar, missiles, and other defensive capabilities to protect against air, surface, and subsurface threats. In addition to its combat systems, the Fitzgerald is equipped with 2 surface search radars, the SBS-73 and the SBS-67. These radars are utilized by different operational teams on board to detect and track surface contacts. The ship also employs a voyage management system, VMS, for planning and navigation, integrating data from various sensors, including radar, GPS, and ARPA. This data is displayed on the ECDIS-N, the Navy's version of the electronic chart display and information system, providing a comprehensive view of the ship's navigational environment. The USS Fitzgerald, like all Navy ships, operates under different conditions of readiness depending on the situation it faces. Navy readiness levels span from routine operations to full combat alert. These conditions are established by the Navy's Operational Naval Instruction, OPNAV, and determine how the ship is manned and what systems are operational. Condition 4, used for peacetime cruising, is the lowest state of readiness. The ship operates with a minimal crew, ensuring safe and efficient navigation, while weapon systems and combat stations are lightly manned. The focus is on maintaining essential functions like communications and the engineering plant for standard operations. On the opposite end is Condition 1, also known as General Quarters, the highest readiness level. This is activated during combat or when facing immediate threats. Every station on the ship, from weapons and sensors to damage control and engineering, is fully manned, with all personnel at their posts, prepared to respond to any danger. This state ensures maximum flexibility and survivability in critical situations. The Navy assesses manning through 2 key metrics, fill and fit. Fill measures how many crew members meet the required pay grade and occupational specialty for their assigned positions. Fit, on the other hand, reflects the number of crew members who have the specific experience, training, and qualifications necessary for their roles. These metrics help ensure that ships like the Fitzgerald are staffed with the right personnel to maintain operational readiness. Training and qualification of the crew are managed through the Navy's Personnel Qualification Standards, PQS system. This system sets the minimum standards and proficiencies required for various watch stations on the ship. Crew members must demonstrate their knowledge and skills by completing a series of tasks outlined in a PQS booklet. This booklet can be tailored to reflect the specific equipment and operational needs of the ship, ensuring that each crew member is fully prepared for their duties. The image of the USS George Washington crew serves as an example of how calculation rules can impact the Navy's assessment of personnel readiness. On the left side of the image, the Navy's calculation includes certain junior enlisted sailors as filling more senior positions, resulting in higher fit metrics. However, when this rule is removed, as shown on the right side, the fit numbers drop significantly, revealing gaps in experience and qualifications. This discrepancy demonstrates how important it is for the Navy to rely on accurate fit metrics, ensuring that the personnel assigned to critical roles have completed the necessary PQS and possess the required experience. While this example involves the USS George Washington, the same principles apply to ships like the USS Fitzgerald, which require fully qualified sailors in key positions to maintain operational readiness. On the USS Fitzgerald, crew members are organized into watch sections to ensure that key positions on the bridge, in the engine room, and in the Combat Information Center are always manned. The number of personnel on duty at any given time depends on the ship's operational needs, which can vary based on the tasks the ship is performing or any potential threats. Each watch position is typically covered by at least 3 rotating teams, known as watch sections. These teams rotate through their shifts to allow for rest and ensure that the ship's operations are continuously supported. When enough qualified crew members are available, a 4th watch section can be added to lighten the workload for everyone. In a typical watch rotation, there are 5 shifts of 4 hours each, covering a 24-hour period. Each team rotates to a different shift each day to ensure continuous coverage. However, this is just one type of rotation. Watch schedules can vary depending on the specific needs and circumstances of the ship. The commanding officer, CO, holds the ultimate responsibility for the ship's safety and mission execution. On the USS Fitzgerald, the CO had nearly 2 decades of naval experience, having served previously as the executive officer on the same ship. He was familiar with the waters where the collision occurred. The executive officer, XO, who was second in command and responsible for the ship's readiness. The XO had joined the USS Fitzgerald in March 2017 and had experience transiting these waters, although not extensively. The bridge team is responsible for maintaining a constant vigil over the ship's surroundings, monitoring the radar and visual lookout reports, and ensuring the vessel's safe passage. In situations requiring quick maneuvering or collision avoidance, the bridge team must act swiftly and decisively. The effectiveness of the bridge team is critical, as they are the first line of defense against navigational hazards. The officer of the deck was the central figure on the bridge, responsible for the safe navigation of the vessel and the management of the bridge team during her watch. She had 3 years of naval service, with prior experience in these waters, though her familiarity with the specific conditions at the time was limited. The OOD's duties included making decisions to avoid collisions and ensuring the ship stayed on its course. Assisting the OOD was the junior officer of the deck, who had 5 years of naval service. The JUD's role was to provide recommendations on ship maneuvers based on radar data and visual observations. The conning officer was responsible for executing the ship's maneuvers as directed by the OOD, passing steering and engine commands to the helmsman. With less than a year of service, and this being his first ship, the conning officer was inexperienced, especially in these specific waters. The quartermaster of the watch monitored the ship's position and provided navigational advice, ensuring the vessel stayed on its intended course and avoided navigational hazards. With 15 years of service, he brought substantial experience to the role, leveraging his deep knowledge of naval operations to support the bridge team effectively. The helmsman, who had 2 years of service, was responsible for steering the vessel according to the orders from the conning officer. The bosun mate of the watch, with 11 years of experience, oversaw the enlisted personnel on the bridge, including the helmsman, ensuring that orders were executed promptly. The Combat Information Center, CIC, is the brain of the ship, where tactical data is collected, analyzed, and used to inform the ship's strategic decisions. Located deep within the ship to protect it from external threats, the CIC is staffed by highly trained personnel who monitor and interpret information from the ship's radar, sonar, and other sensors. The CIC's primary role is to support the bridge by providing comprehensive situational awareness. This includes detecting and tracking nearby vessels, assessing the risk of collision, and advising the bridge on the best course of action. The CIC must work seamlessly with the bridge to ensure that the ship can navigate safely and respond to threats effectively. The Tactical Action Officer, TO, oversaw the operations within the CIC, ensuring the ship's combat readiness and that vital information about nearby vessels and threats was relayed to the bridge. The TO on the USS Fitzgerald had 9 years of naval service and had served on the ship since January 2017. The watch officer was responsible for supervising CIC operations, had 2 years of experience, and had made several transits in these waters. The watch supervisor, with 11 years of experience, was responsible for manually plotting radar targets using a maneuvering board. This involved marking target positions at regular intervals and connecting these marks to calculate the closest point of approach and estimate the target's course and speed. This vital information was then relayed to the bridge to assist with navigation and collision avoidance. The Surface Warfare Coordinator, with 23 years of experience, was tasked with creating the surface plot by gathering data from various sources, including radar and the automatic identification system. His role was crucial in assessing potential surface threats and ensuring the bridge was aware of any vessels that could impact the ship's course. The Surface Warfare Supervisor and Optical Sight System Operator were responsible for tracking and visually identifying surface contacts. Both had limited experience, with 3 years and 2 years of service, respectively. The crew operating the USS Fitzgerald brought a mix of experience levels across both the bridge and CIC. This blend is typical on naval vessels, where the effectiveness of operations depends on the collaboration between experienced and less experienced crew members. In stark contrast to the military precision of the Fitzgerald was the ACX Crystal, a commercial container ship designed for the global trade routes. The Crystal, measuring 222.6 meters in length, and with a gross tonnage of 29,060, was built to carry over 14,000 metric tons of cargo in its 2,858 TEU capacity. The ship was powered by a single diesel engine, capable of driving the vessel at speeds of up to 25.3 knots. Despite its commercial nature, the ACX Crystal operated under strict maritime regulations, ensuring safe passage through busy shipping lanes. With a crew of 20, the ACX Crystal operated under the STCW Code and International Maritime Organization regulations, ensuring crew members had proper training in areas like bridge resource management, radar, and ARPA operations. Officers holding unlimited tonnage licenses underwent regular proficiency tests, particularly when renewing their credentials every 5 years. The crew was also required to adhere to rest regulations, with a minimum of 10 hours of rest within a 24-hour period and 77 hours over 7 days. The vessel had 3 bridge watch teams that rotated through 6 4-hour shifts, with each team working 2 watches per 24-hour period. This setup, despite having fewer crew members than the Fitzgerald, ensured compliance with international maritime standards for safe navigation and operation. The master of the ACX Crystal held ultimate responsibility for the ship's safe navigation and compliance with international maritime regulations. He had extensive experience as a captain, with the necessary certifications to command large commercial vessels like the ACX Crystal. The chief officer, who was second in command after the master, was responsible for the overall operation of the ship's deck department, including cargo operations, maintenance, and safety drills. The chief officer also had a significant role in navigation, particularly during complex maneuvers or challenging conditions. The second officer was the officer in charge of the navigational watch during the collision. He was responsible for monitoring the vessel's course and speed, ensuring compliance with the planned route, and avoiding collisions. The third officer, like the second officer, was a certified officer responsible for standing watch and assisting in navigation and collision avoidance. The able seaman, AB, on duty served as the helmsman and lookout, executing the second officer's commands to steer the ship and maintain a proper lookout for navigational hazards. The bridge of the ACX Crystal is equipped with modern navigation systems, including radar and an automatic radar plotting aid, ARPA, which allowed the crew to monitor nearby vessels and navigate with precision. Sagami-Nara Bay, located off the Izu Peninsula on the southeastern coast of Honshu Island, Japan, is known for its heavy maritime traffic. The bay serves as a critical thoroughfare for vessels heading to and from Tokyo Bay, one of the busiest ports in the world. On the night of June 16th and into the early hours of June 17th, the bay was bustling with ships moving in various directions, including the USS Fitzgerald and the ACX Crystal, both unknowingly on a collision course. As the Fitzgerald headed south and the ACX Crystal sailed northeast, neither ship was aware that their paths would soon intersect. The Fitzgerald, with its advanced radar and sonar, and the ACX Crystal, with its cargo and seasoned crew, were both bound by the same international maritime rules. Yet, the convergence of these two very different vessels in one of the world's busiest maritime corridors would lead to a disaster that neither could avoid. On the morning of June 16, 2017, the USS Fitzgerald departed from Yokosuka, Japan, located on Honshu Island. This marked the beginning of a series of scheduled operations in Sagami-Wan, a bay situated about 50 nautical miles southwest of the port. After leaving Yokosuka around 11:30 a.m., the Fitzgerald proceeded to an anchorage where it paused for approximately 3 hours to load ammunition. Later in the day, the Fitzgerald moved to a position off the southwest coast of the Miura Peninsula within Sagami-Wan. Here, the crew conducted a series of helicopter flight operations from late afternoon into the early evening. These exercises were followed by small boat operations, which continued into the late evening. At around 10 p.m., a watch turnover took place on the navigation bridge and the CIC. This new watch would be in place from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. As the ship concluded its small boat operations around 11:03 p.m. and began its southbound transit out of the Sagami-Wan training area, the CO left the bridge to retire for the night. Before departing, he issued night orders for the upcoming transit, allowing a greater margin for course deviation before the officer of the deck needed to notify him. Per the CO's standing orders, the OD was instructed to call the CO if any vessel had a closest point of approach of less than 3 miles, with the report to be made at 5 miles or 20 minutes prior to the calculated CPA, whichever occurred first. The XO followed suit and exited the bridge approximately 30 minutes later, around 11:30 p.m. The Fitzgerald set a course southwest, heading out to sea at a speed of approximately 22 knots. As night fell, the Fitzgerald adhered to standard U.S. Navy procedures for surface ships operating before sunrise. The ship was at darkened ship condition, meaning all exterior lights were extinguished except for the necessary navigation lights, and all interior lights were switched to red to facilitate crew rest. Additionally, the ship was secured in a physical posture known as modified zebra, with most internal doors and hatches sealed to maintain watertight integrity in the event of flooding or fire, although watertight scuttles were left open for ease of movement between compartments. Between 11:40 p.m. and 0:25 a.m., as recorded by the Fitzgerald's voyage management system, the destroyer overtook multiple vessels on both its port and starboard sides. By 0:33 a.m. on June 17th, the VMS displayed 5 vessels heading generally northeast, crossing from the Fitzgerald's starboard to port side, along with 2 vessels traveling in the same direction as the destroyer on its starboard bow. The OD contacted the CO to discuss these contacts, and in response, the Fitzgerald altered its course, deviating from the planned track line by up to 3,800 yards, approximately 1.8 nautical miles. Maintaining a speed of around 19 to 20 knots, the Fitzgerald maneuvered to pass astern of the 5 northeastbound vessels, leaving them to port with the closest separation being just under 1 mile. After this maneuver at 0:33 a.m., although subsequent vessels came within the 3-mile CPA threshold, the OD did not make any further calls to the CO regarding these close encounters. The ACX Crystal departed from the port of Nagoya, Japan, around 4:48 p.m. on June 16th, en route to Tokyo Bay, carrying approximately 15,330 metric tons of cargo. The ACX Crystal was scheduled to arrive at the Tokyo Bay Pilot Station by 5 a.m. on June 17th and was making its way east-northeast at a speed of about 18 knots. Earlier that evening, the master of the ACX Crystal had overseen the ship's departure from Nagoya until about 8:20 p.m., when he handed over command to the third officer and went below to rest. After midnight, the second officer took over the navigation watch, accompanied by an able-bodied seaman handling steering and lookout duties. The master's standing orders required the watch officer to maintain at least a 1-mile closest point of approach, CPA, to other vessels and to closely monitor any vessel within 6 minutes of the CPA. If maintaining this distance wasn't possible, the master was to be contacted. Around midnight, as the ACX Crystal approached the southern tip of the Izu Peninsula, it was nearly parallel to the Singapore-flagged container ship Wanhai 266, which was also heading toward Tokyo Bay, positioned about 2 miles north off the ACX Crystal's port side. Another vessel, the Maersk Evora, was traveling parallel to the ACX Crystal, approximately 4 miles to the south and astern of it. The USS Fitzgerald was equipped with an automatic identification system, AIS, but it was not broadcasting its data to other vessels at the time of the accident. In line with Navy practice at that time, naval vessels like the Fitzgerald typically did not transmit AIS information, although they could receive data from other ships. During this voyage, the Fitzgerald's AIS was set to receive-only mode. As a result, other vessels in the vicinity could not track the destroyer electronically via AIS and had to rely on visual observation, radar, and ARPA to determine its position. Compounding this challenge, the Fitzgerald was designed to present a smaller radar target compared to non-military vessels of similar size, making it more difficult to detect on radar displays. At approximately 1:08 a.m., when the USS Fitzgerald was about 12 miles away from the ACX Crystal, the OD noticed 2 vessels on the ship's SBS-73 radar. She attempted to electronically acquire, or hook, these vessels to obtain more detailed information, but encountered difficulties in doing so. As the USS Fitzgerald closed in to about 10 miles from the ACX Crystal, around 1:12 a.m., the OD could visually spot the ship's lights through the bridge windows, visible off the destroyer's starboard bow. Meanwhile, in the CIC, the Surface Warfare Coordinator, responsible for monitoring and coordinating the overall surface picture, including all radar targets, scanned his radar scope for contacts before taking a brief restroom break between 1:05 and 1:10 a.m. Upon his return, sometime between 1:15 and 1:20 a.m., he scanned the radar again, but initially saw no targets. Additionally, the Surface Warfare Supervisor and the Optical Sight System Operator did not report any targets to him during that time. At approximately 1:15 a.m., the second officer on the ACX Crystal initiated a scheduled course change according to the vessel's voyage plan. The ship gradually shifted from an eastbound course of 089 degree to an east-northeast bound course of about 069 degree. By 1:19 a.m., with the course change completed, the USS Fitzgerald was about 6.5 miles away, approaching from the north off the container ship's port bow. The second officer noticed a green light about 3 miles away, which was the Fitzgerald's starboard navigation light. He continued to monitor the vessel as it drew closer, observing only the green starboard light on the approaching ship. As the ACX Crystal approached within about 4 miles of the USS Fitzgerald, the OD observed on the ARPA that the closest point of approach, CPA, would be about 0.75 miles, with the vessel expected to cross the stern of the destroyer. During the period between 1:21 and 1:25 a.m., the OD used ARPA to acquire and track 2 eastbound vessels on the starboard side. The closest of these was the ACX Crystal, followed by the Maersk Evora. Around this time, the OD discussed the distance to the 2 vessels with the junior officer of the deck, who had been primarily performing lookout duties and training the new conning officer during the transit. The JOD then moved to the starboard bridge wing and observed the ACX Crystal through a large set of binoculars, known as Big Eyes. She noticed a second vessel behind the ACX Crystal and urged the OOD to take a look through the binoculars as well. After observing the situation, the JOD suggested slowing down the destroyer to improve the separation between the vessels. However, the OOD expressed concern that reducing speed could worsen the situation. The OOD also considered turning the destroyer to starboard to pass astern of both vessels, but decided against it, as this maneuver would bring the ship closer to land, with the vessel being about 8.2 miles offshore from the Isa Peninsula at that time. According to the USS Fitzgerald's deck log, at 1:22 a.m., a course change was ordered to 200 degrees, altering the ship's heading from its previous course of 190 degrees. Around the same time, the second officer on the ACX Crystal watched the USS Fitzgerald closely as it approached. When the destroyer was about 3 miles away, he checked the radar, observed the Fitzgerald's green navigation light, and then checked the radar again. Concerned about the situation, he asked the able-bodied seaman to stand by the wheel. The second officer then moved to the port side of the bridge and used a signal light to communicate with the Fitzgerald. This occurred at approximately 1:27 a.m., about 2.5 minutes after first noticing the green light and just 3 minutes before the collision. Despite his attempts, the second officer received no reply to his signaling. He then returned to the radar, but quickly walked back to the port side of the bridge to flash the signal light twice more at the destroyer. The second officer expected the Fitzgerald to alter course, as the ACX Crystal, to starboard, was the stand-on vessel. Under Colreg's Rule 15, the Fitzgerald, as the give-way vessel, was required to act to avoid a collision, while the ACX Crystal was to maintain its course and speed. The distance between the USS Fitzgerald and the ACX Crystal was closing rapidly at about 50 feet per second, with the two vessels converging at a relative speed of more than 30 knots. In the CIC, the Surface Warfare Coordinator returned from a brief break and continued checking the radar, communicating with the Optical Sight System operator to confirm that no surface contacts were in the destroyer's immediate vicinity. Suddenly, he noticed a new radar contact appearing on the AIS. He quickly directed the Optical Sight System operator to investigate. The Optical Sight System operator, who had already seen numerous targets, about 80 to 100, during his watch, spotted a vessel on the given bearing, estimating it to be about 4 to 5 miles away, later identified as the Merskavora. As he continued turning his camera to the right, he suddenly saw the ACX Crystal, much closer than expected. Stunned by the proximity of the vessel, he hesitated for about 8 seconds, unable to react immediately. The tactical action officer in the CIC also saw the ACX Crystal on the Optical Sight System operator's camera. As the vessels drew closer, and when they were about 1,000 meters apart, the second officer on the ACX Crystal instructed the AB at the helm to apply a 10 degrees starboard rudder, followed by a 15 degrees starboard rudder, and finally, he ordered the helm hard to starboard. On board the USS Fitzgerald, the OOD initially believed that the destroyer would safely clear both crossing vessels, the ACX Crystal and the Merskavora, or possibly the one High 266 and the ACX Crystal. However, about a minute before the collision, the OOD saw the superstructure of the ACX Crystal and realized that the Fitzgerald was not going to clear the container ship. In response, she initially ordered the conning officer to come hard right, but quickly canceled the order before it could be relayed to the helmsman. The OOD then ordered a hard left rudder and a head flank speed. At 1:30 and 32 seconds a.m., with the USS Fitzgerald traveling at 22.1 knots and the ACX Crystal at 18.4 knots, the two vessels collided. Despite the impending danger, neither the Fitzgerald nor the ACX Crystal bridge teams sounded any alarms or made announcements to warn their crews. The impact of the ACX Crystal's bow penetrated the Fitzgerald's hull and superstructure, initially causing the destroyer to list 14 degrees to port. The Crystal's bulbous bow, striking below the waterline, punctured the side of the Fitzgerald, creating a hole approximately 13 feet by 17 feet, spanning the second and third decks below the main deck. This breach allowed water to flow directly into Auxiliary Machinery Room 1 and the Berthing 2 starboard access trunk. A large volume of water rapidly flooded into Berthing 2, causing the Fitzgerald to settle into a 7 degrees starboard list as the water weighed the ship down on that side. Additionally, the breach caused flooding in other compartments, including spaces connected to the damaged area that were not protected by watertight barriers. The rapid influx of water spread to nearby areas due to cross-flooding, which occurs when connected compartments are overwhelmed before watertight doors can be sealed. Further complications arose from a ruptured fire main and damage to aqueous film-forming foam pipes, both of which are crucial for firefighting operations. The collision also caused structural damage to several areas of the ship, including the commanding officer's cabin, officer staterooms, radar rooms, and spaces dedicated to combat systems maintenance. The loss of power in the forward section of the ship and a breakdown of external communications followed. To signal its inability to maneuver, the Fitzgerald displayed the red over red lighting configuration, an international maritime signal indicating that a vessel is not under command. This signal informs nearby vessels that the ship is unable to steer or navigate normally, requiring others to adjust course to avoid a collision. On the ACX Crystal, no one was injured, but the container ship sustained damage to its bow and forward compartments. The forepeak tank was gashed significantly, and a smaller gash was found in the bosun's stores compartment. The USS Fitzgerald is equipped to handle emergencies like fire and flooding, with the Damage Control Assistant, DCA, and Damage Control Chief leading the response. When an emergency occurs, General Quarters is called, and the crew reports to pre-assigned stations. Key to these efforts are the Damage Control Repair Lockers, where teams coordinate repairs and manage damage control actions. Following the collision, the DCA and Damage Control Chief immediately organized damage control efforts, calling General Quarters and coordinating ship-wide responses. Initial reports described significant flooding, including a 12-foot by 12-foot hole in Auxiliary Compartment 1 and a 3-foot by 5-foot hole in the starboard passage to berthings 1 and 2. These reports were later confirmed to be accounts of the same damage, which was ultimately measured as a 17-foot by 13-foot breach caused by the collision, spanning both the second and third decks. Damage control teams used deductors to remove water from the flooded compartments. These devices work by using a high-pressure water jet, typically drawn from the ship's fire main system, to create suction that helps remove water from affected areas. Additionally, the Fitzgerald deployed 3 onboard pumps to assist with water removal. As damage control efforts began, departments worked to account for missing crew members. 3 sailors were reported trapped in sonar control, where flooding had blocked their exit. Initial rescue attempts were hindered by damage and obstructions, but a team eventually reached them through the escape hatch and rescued the trapped sailors around 2:15. Later, 2 sailors from the Combat Systems Department were reported missing at 2:25, and by 3:16, the count of missing crew had risen to 4. A final all-hands accounting at 5:40 confirmed that 7 sailors remained missing. These 7 sailors were later found to have perished in berthing 2, the crew's living area located 2 decks below the main deck. Berthing 2 was a space spanning 29 feet in length and 40 feet in width, containing 42 racks, beds, a bathroom, and a lounge area with sofas, chairs, and a television. The space rapidly filled with water after the collision, flooding nearly completely within 30 to 60 seconds. Of the 35 sailors present in berthing 2, 28 managed to escape, but debris, such as mattresses, furniture, and equipment, made it difficult for others to reach safety. The ship's 5 to 7 degree list to starboard further complicated escape efforts, particularly for sailors trying to cross from the starboard to the port side. 3 crew members, including the commanding officer, sustained serious injuries, including traumatic brain injuries, and were medically evacuated to the U.S. Navy Hospital in Yokosuka for treatment. They were released on June 18th and 19th, 2017. The USS Fitzgerald, moving at 3 knots, began its return to homeport under its own power at 4:53. To avoid taking on additional water, the ship maintained a speed between 3 and 5 knots. After flooding was stabilized, the list was held at 5 degrees to starboard. At 8:15, 2 tugboats from Yokosuka Naval Base assisted in guiding the Fitzgerald. Steering was challenging due to the damage, and control was shifted to the aft steering control station, a rarely used but well-practiced arrangement. By 1607, the Fitzgerald entered the inner harbor, and at 1854, it moored safely at Yokosuka Naval Base with the help of the tugboats. Once the USS Fitzgerald returned to Yokosuka, a Navy dive team conducted 2 dives. The first dive took place on the evening of June 17th, focusing on an initial assessment of the damage and identifying potential entry points for the search of missing personnel. The second dive began at 4:54 on the morning of June 18th. Divers entered berthing 2 through the hole in the starboard side of the ship. GMSN Rigsby was found near the top of the starboard access trunk at 5:23 and brought to the dive boat. The team re-entered the ship at 6:11, where they found YN-2 Douglas, FC-1 Sibayon, PSE Martin, and STG-2 Huyn in the lounge area of berthing 2. GM-1 Hernandez was located in the main passageway near the lounge, while FCC Rem was found inside the closed bathroom. These 7 sailors were recovered from the starboard side of berthing 2. As the Fitzgerald headed south on the night of the accident, the OD detected 2 radar contacts off the starboard bow, likely the ACX Crystal and either the Maersk Evora or one High 266. These vessels were following normal traffic patterns toward Tokyo. Under Call Regs, the Fitzgerald, as the giveaway vessel with these ships on its starboard side, was required to take early and significant action to avoid crossing ahead. The recommended action would have been to alter course to starboard and safely pass clear of all 3 vessels. Rather than taking appropriate action, such as turning or slowing to avoid the 3 vessels as required by navigation rules and the CO's standing orders, the Fitzgerald's bridge team continued ahead, crossing in front of the one High 266 and into the path of the ACX Crystal, leading to the collision. While there was space to pass the one High 266, this maneuver was unwise due to the proximity of the ACX Crystal. The Fitzgerald's actions did not conform to collision regulations, and the NTSB concluded that the bridge team failed to take early and substantial action to avoid the collision with the ACX Crystal. The OOD on the USS Fitzgerald detected 2 vessels 12 miles away, about 22 minutes before the collision, leading investigators to question how the accident occurred despite the significant resources and time available to the bridge team. Training, experience, and established procedures are designed to prevent errors, especially in fast-changing situations. Although the OD on the Fitzgerald spotted the 2 crossing vessels on the starboard bow at a distance of 12 miles using the bridge radar around 108, she reported being unable to acquire them on ARPA to determine the CPA. At this early stage, the OD had enough time and resources at her disposal, including the assistance of other bridge watchstanders and CIC personnel. Bridge resource management involves utilizing all available resources, both human and technical, to ensure safe navigation. Effective communication within the bridge team is crucial for successful BRM. The OD should have informed the JOD about the vessels and asked her to monitor them, as well as sought support from CIC, where several watchstanders could track the vessels using different methods. According to the CO's standing orders, the CIC was responsible for supporting the bridge team, with the tactical action officer in charge of ensuring this support was provided. The OD was also expected to ensure that the CIC relayed critical information to help safely navigate the vessel. However, during interviews with bridge and CIC watchstanders, investigators discovered that there was minimal communication between the 2 groups. Even though the bridge team had identified vessel traffic and CIC personnel had observed surface contacts on their systems or were aware of the vessel's course changes to avoid traffic. Poor communication is a leading factor in many marine accidents involving human error. Bridge resource management is designed to address this by encouraging open dialogue among the crew, allowing junior officers to share their opinions and challenge their superiors when necessary for safety. Likewise, senior officers are expected to welcome feedback. When BRM is properly implemented, the crew should consistently communicate about vessel traffic and feel empowered to raise concerns. In the case of the Fitzgerald, it's unclear whether the crew had a proper briefing before their watch. Without thorough discussion about the navigation route and high-traffic areas, the team missed opportunities to identify risks and plan for them. The lack of communication and underuse of available resources contributed to the breakdown in coordination between the bridge and CIC, leading to the accident. When the JOD alerted the OOD about the vessels to starboard, the OOD had already tracked the ACX Crystal on ARPA and determined that its CPA would be 1,500 yards, or 0.75 nautical mile, passing behind the Fitzgerald. Satisfied with this distance, the OOD shifted focus to another vessel, the Maersk Evora, to determine its CPA. Although this CPA was within the threshold that required reporting to the CO, the OOD chose not to follow standing orders, opting instead to make a report afterward. This deliberate decision to disregard the CO's instructions is concerning, as informing the CO might have prompted action to avoid the collision. At 1:20, when the JOD spotted the vessels, she suggested slowing down, but the OOD disagreed, claiming it would worsen the situation without providing a clear explanation. There was also a brief discussion about turning to starboard, but the OOD expressed concern about heading toward land. Even though the Fitzgerald was still 8.2 miles from the Isaac Peninsula, and a temporary course adjustment would not have posed a risk. Additionally, there were no immediate contacts to starboard that would have complicated the maneuver. With the ship's maneuverability, a significant turn to starboard or a reduction in speed could have safely allowed the Fitzgerald to pass behind the ACX Crystal. The ship's deck log shows a course change was ordered at 1:22, shifting from 190 degrees to 200 degrees, with the new heading steady by 1:24. This course change proved to be a crucial error, though investigators could not determine the reasoning behind it. A study conducted by the NTSB, using GPS and course data from the Fitzgerald, ACX Crystal, and 1-266, found that had the Fitzgerald maintained its original course of 190 degrees, it would have passed ahead of the ACX Crystal with a CPA of about 1,000 yards. The NTSB concluded that the unexplained shift to starboard put the Fitzgerald on a direct collision path with the ACX Crystal. Multiple CIC personnel told investigators that no contacts were close enough to the Fitzgerald to require plotting. However, a review of ECTA screenshots from the vessel's VMS revealed numerous contacts that fell within the CO's reporting and tracking guidelines. This information was available in real time to both the bridge and the CIC on the night of the accident. Although some CIC personnel noticed these contacts, they did not share the information with others. The surface warfare coordinator saw pop-up targets on his radar, and the surface warfare supervisor's scope was cluttered, but neither reported the issue or called a technician. Despite the clutter, they didn't switch to the other radar or check the VMS, which would have shown nearby vessels. This missed opportunity prevented them from identifying collision risks, and the CIC could have provided crucial information to the OOD to avoid the collision. Despite the TO responsibility to ensure CIC supported the bridge, she did not instruct the surface warfare supervisor or coordinator to track and report contacts within the required proximity to the Fitzgerald, as outlined by the CO's standing orders. The NTSB concluded that CIC personnel did not adequately support the bridge team in monitoring nearby surface targets. The review of the ACX Crystal's voyage data recorder revealed that at 1:06 a.m., a faint radar return, later identified as the Fitzgerald, appeared on the X-band radar about 13 miles away. The Fitzgerald's radar signature intermittently appeared and disappeared as it approached, but by 1:15 a.m., it was consistently visible on the VDR. Despite this, the ACX Crystal did not acquire the Fitzgerald on ARPA. Unlike the nearby 1-266, which had tracked the destroyer, including its course and speed, from 7.3 miles away. Investigators concluded that prudent seamanship should have led the ACX Crystal's second officer to acquire the Fitzgerald on ARPA to assess the collision risk. When the second officer and AB on the ACX Crystal first visually spotted the Fitzgerald's green starboard light, they estimated it was 3 miles away, with radar indicating a collision in about 5 minutes. At 1:27, the second officer used a flashing lamp to signal the Fitzgerald, but received no response. The NTSB concluded that the Fitzgerald's radar signature was detectable, and the second officer should have used ARPA to assess the collision risk. The second officer monitored the situation visually and via radar, but despite being the stand-on vessel, he did not take enough action when it became clear the Fitzgerald was not avoiding collision. Flashing the light indicated uncertainty, and although he could have used the whistle signal as per call regs, no one on the Fitzgerald reported seeing the flashing light. A radio call could have been confusing, as the officer didn't know the vessel's name. At 1:29, about a minute before the collision, the second officer ordered a starboard turn, but it wasn't aggressive enough to avoid the crash. Despite being trained, he failed to fully utilize ARPA or AIS, which could have helped identify the Fitzgerald and prompt evasive action. The Fitzgerald's stealth design and lack of an AIS broadcast likely contributed to the ACX Crystal's delayed response. Navy policy requires personnel to apply operational risk management, but investigators found no risk management plan for the Fitzgerald's outbound transit after boating operations and bridge turnovers. While the XO and navigator discussed the route, there was no formal briefing, unlike the detailed plan for departing Tokyo 1. This missed opportunity prevented the crew from collaboratively identifying risks, such as crossing high-traffic areas and assigning a more experienced officer to help navigate. Despite the CO allowing deviations from the route, the OD failed to report traffic with a CPA under 3 miles multiple times. The CO did not fully assess the risks of the busy traffic routes and should have assigned a senior officer to support the bridge team. Many watch personnel on the Fitzgerald had additional duties the day before the accident, which contributed to an already high workload and limited rest. The OOD, who served as the boat operations safety officer, and TEO, who was also the operations officer, both took on watch duties after completing their earlier responsibilities. As a result, the crew had minimal rest, with the TEO stating she had no sleep and the OOD reporting only a brief nap before going on watch. In the CIC, fatigue was evident, with one operator reportedly falling asleep while on duty. Fatigue typically sets in with less than 7 to 8 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period, leading to acute fatigue. Chronic fatigue can develop with repeated lack of sleep. The accident occurred during a circadian low, roughly 0200 to 0600, a time when the body is naturally more fatigued, which can further degrade alertness and performance. Altered sleep patterns, such as shifting between day and night sleep cycles, can also reduce sleep quality and exacerbate fatigue. Several critical decisions were missed during this time. The surface warfare supervisor failed to detect important targets, the OD made poor navigational choices and didn't seek CIC support, and the tactical action officer did not ensure proper coordination between the CIC and the bridge team. All of these individuals had little or no sleep. It is possible to conclude that several of the Fitzgerald's bridge and CIC watchstanders were acutely fatigued during the accident, which likely impaired their situational awareness and response to the approaching ACX Crystal. The Fitzgerald's tight schedule left little room for crew rest, a common issue in the Navy's forward-deployed operations. The bridge team and CIC did not work effectively together, and the OD was unfamiliar with navigation rules, ignoring CO orders. While the CO had responsibility for crew training, Navy leadership also had a duty to ensure the effectiveness of training and certifications. The crew's work/rest schedule did not allow for the required 8 hours of rest, likely degrading performance. A combination of insufficient manning, lack of training, and a high-paced schedule contributed to crew errors. It is possible to conclude that the Navy failed to provide proper oversight of the Fitzgerald's scheduling, training, and fatigue management. Following the investigation into the collision between the USS Fitzgerald and the ACX Crystal, the National Transportation Safety Board issued several key findings. These findings provide a detailed assessment of the contributing factors, including operational shortcomings, crew fatigue, and communication failures, both on the Fitzgerald and the ACX Crystal. The investigation highlights the importance of adherence to navigational protocols, effective risk management, and the critical need for improved oversight and training within the Navy. The Navy's investigation into the USS Fitzgerald collision revealed serious gaps in both training and navigation. Officers demonstrated insufficient knowledge of the international rules of the nautical road, while watch team members struggled with basic radar operations, limiting their ability to accurately track surrounding vessels. The officer of the deck and the bridge team failed to take timely action to avoid a collision, neglected to maintain a safe speed, and did not alert other ships of imminent danger. Additionally, they failed to adhere to local vessel traffic separation schemes, and key supervisors did not utilize available tools like the automated identification system to monitor nearby commercial ships. Leadership and communication breakdowns were also critical factors. The Bridge and Combat Information Center teams failed to share vital information, and the officer of the deck did not follow Navy procedures requiring them to notify the commanding officer. Supervisors did not fully understand the complexity of the situation, and individual crew members were hesitant to correct identified errors. Furthermore, command leadership failed to address issues following an earlier near collision, allowing poor performance to persist. Crew fatigue compounded these problems, as the leadership did not ensure sufficient rest, undermining overall readiness and performance leading up to the incident. The NTSB issued several new recommendations following its investigation into the USS Fitzgerald collision. For the U.S. Navy, the board advises revising the training and qualification requirements for officers of the deck to ensure a stronger understanding of collision regulations. Additionally, the NTSB recommends improving bridge resource management training to foster better teamwork and communication between the Bridge and Combat Information Center teams. Another key recommendation is for Navy vessels to broadcast Automatic Identification System, AIS, information when near commercial vessel traffic, except when doing so might compromise tactical or strategic objectives. For Quest Ship Management Incorporated, the NTSB suggests enhancing training for navigation officers, specifically focusing on collision avoidance regulations, radar operation, and the use of automatic radar plotting aids. These measures aim to address the issues revealed during the investigation and improve overall navigational safety. Following the USS Fitzgerald collision, Commander Bryce Benson, the commanding officer, and Lieutenant Natalie Combs, the tactical action officer, faced serious accusations related to their roles in the incident. Both were initially charged with negligent homicide and other serious offenses, but these charges were later dropped, with the Navy opting for administrative penalties instead. Commander Benson and Lieutenant Combs received letters of censure, criticizing their leadership and decision-making leading up to the accident. Benson, in particular, was reprimanded for leaving an inexperienced watch team to navigate through a high-traffic area at night. Combs was faulted for poor communication and failing to effectively support the bridge team. Both were cited for contributing to a culture of complacency aboard the ship. Legal challenges also arose, including concerns about unlawful command influence, UCI, where senior Navy officials were accused of making public comments that might have unfairly impacted the fairness of the trials. This eventually played a role in the dismissal of criminal charges against the officers.